Hey, what is up guys? In this video, I'm going to be teaching you 3 beginner openings that every chess player should know. So I hope you enjoy and let's get started. The Rye Lopez is probably the most common opening you'll find and get when you're a beginner, just because it's so easy to get in a real game. Like, do you not recognize the moves e4, e5? I mean, right? At a rating below 1000, like every game is this opening. And then let's say white just develops his knight to attack the pawn, very beginner-ish thoughts. Then black defends the pawn, and to start the Rye Lopez, white plays bishop b5, attacking the knight to take the pawn. What a common opening, and you're already in the Rye Lopez. So it's a very common to get. It's not like an opening that I'll teach you, but you'll never get in your actual games. So it's super easy to get this in your real games, no worries. And with the Rye Lopez, there are like a lot of things you can do. One of the main things is, let's say black plays bishop c5 in this position. One of the beginner mistakes that players see in this position is to take the knight. And you think, I am so smart for a beginner chess player. I take the knight, removing the defender of this pawn, so that after he recaptures, I take the pawn. I'm like future world champion here, genius. But all they have to do is take with their d-pawn, you take this, and they go queen d4, and you're just screwed. Because the knight's attacked, they're threatening mate, and the e4 pawn's attacked. And even if this happens, it doesn't even do anything. Because first of all, the knight is, gonna be hanging. If we take, then it just takes and you're screwed. So, don't take the knight. Like, you'd think that's the whole point of going bishop b5, but it's not. It's mostly to develop the bishop. There are some few other reasons. And another move that Engine says is actually the best move for white here is a knight takes e5. And when you see this move, you're probably like, bruh, 6 knight. Like, I'm being the world champion when I think taking the knight. You're being like somebody who'll never get world champion when you take the pawn. Well, I'm actually thinking like a world champion here, because after takes, then there's the move d4, and that's forking the bishop and knight because the pawn's defended by the queen. See, told you I was being the world champion here, viewer. And yeah, there are a lot of ideas in the Rye Lopez, but that's a very common one. After bishop c5, which you'll get a lot because your opponent just wants to develop, this is a very common thing. You take the pawn, and you're not exactly winning. Engine, I'm pretty sure, says you're about equal. And if your opponent takes the pawn, thinking, well, I might as well get a pawn, be pretty confident in yourself taking back, because after they take the pawn, it's actually losing for them, because then you attack their knight, and this and it's just not very good for them. If they can defend the knight, like, don't get me wrong, but they have to waste a move doing this while we have our bishop and queen out. It's just not good for them. So yeah, that's one thing you can always do. And say um say you don't like taking, but because then you get positions you don't like. There's a lot of options from here. There's the move I usually play, just knight c3, just play chess, there's a more complex move, but if you figure it out and why to do it, then it's really good for beginners. um there's c3, kind of thinking like Caro Kann here, because then, like, let's say they just develop their knight. What you do next move, takes, and just gain the center, attacking the bishop with tempo, so he has to move back. Or he can move here, but we'll get to that later. Um, and he moves back. You own this. You literally rented the center for your own. You don't even need a house. These two pawns guard your like life over here. Um, So you control the center, just a really nice position. You can even take the knight, and honestly, you'll be fine. It's not a great move because then you get his bishop out, and you'd rather have him waste his time getting this pawn up. But you're just in a nice position here. And there are a lot of like very advanced Rye Lopez lines, some not very advanced that you can study on your own. That's just kind of the basics of Rye Lopez. So yeah, that's the Rye Lopez. The Caro Kann is another very good opening for beginners because if your opponent doesn't know how to play it, he can fall for a lot of opening traps that are very common to not see and just fall for off the bat. So how it's played is e4, which is very common. Like this is an opening that you'll get like over half the games when you're a beginner, just because e4 is such a common move. Like your opponent watches a single video, sees that the creator that he was watching played e4 just because it's not a regular move, like developing his bishop. Oh, I'm gonna play that too. Look at me, Mr. Copycat here. So it's very common opening. But instead of playing e5, which is very common, or like knight f6, or whatever you usually play, you play the weird move, pawn to c6. And you're probably like, bro, what are you talking about right now? Why would I go pawn to c6? That blocks out my knight from developing, which you tell me to do all the time. And like, just why? This doesn't even like gain any space for your pawn. Well, I'll tell you why. Let's say white plays knight f3, just casually developing a knight for no reason. Totally no reason. Nope. And the whole point is to then go d5. So then if takes, you're just in a really, really nice spot. Um, because you own the center-ish. And if your opponent wants to kind of fight back for the center, they have to play d4, which just wastes a move, and then you develop your bishop or knight, getting you equal on development as your opponent. So that's a nice line, and a nice trap in the Caro Kann that's pretty common is if they played here instead of knight f3, then you go here, 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 just getting the bishop back, not on developing it. Then you play b5, and this is a completely beginner trap. Like I bet anyone um above the rating of like I don't even know honestly, like 1300 would see this, maybe even like 1000. Like it it just like after 1500 they'll definitely see it, but it's possible to even for people to fall for it at even like 1400, just because it's just like how you're looking at the chessboard. You're like, what is this? Are you trying to get like a reversed orangutan or something? Like what are you doing? But it's just a really casual move because if your opponent doesn't notice it, which he probably won't because he's thinking like, dude, are you drunk? The point is, White's bishop is just stuck. Yeah, just stuck. He can't take his own companions here. Companions in war. It doesn't want to be taken, and I mean, yeah, that's kind of all the squares the bishop can go here. Or, I mean, it could also do this, but I mean, that's like a 1 billion IQ move that I don't think he'd do. Um, and sure, you're probably asking me, like, bro, okay, it's stuck, but it doesn't need to go anywhere. It's not under attack. Um, and there are a few other variations like this where you get the same attack, the same point, but with a little bit more, how do I say this, like a little bit more sneaky, a little bit harder to notice, but I mean, I'm not going to share those today. If you want to learn more, then shoo. But the point is, then you just play a5. Again, your opponent's thinking like, dude, have you literally gone drunk? Like, what? They develop their knight thinking like, okay, now I'm forking your pawns, kiddo, and then they just lose the bishop. Let's ignore the fact that white can take the pawn. Nope, no. There we go. Then they go a4. No mistake there. And that's a nice thing because after you get to d5, the white squared bishop is really easy to trap because the whole point of e4 as white is to get your white bishop out early. And that's the thing. When you go d5, you're controlling these two squares for the white bishop. And because of those two facts, if the bishop goes here, then you know your opponent's gonna have some fun. So yeah, just remember these two nice moves, and yeah, you'll be set. There are a few other variations like here, like it's a very complicated opening. Like here, the main goal is to get a setup like knight d7 here, something like that. And be careful with your d5 pawn because the only thing defending it is your queen. So before you go knight d7, you don't want to lose this pawn too early. Yeah. So yeah, that's Caro Kann, a little bit about it. Yeah, Caro Kann. The Italian is a pretty defensive opening for beginners, but I figured I might put it in because the Rye Lopez and Caro Kann are usually pretty aggressive openings, and not all people like to play like that. So the Italian is just a pretty defensive opening that's just pretty simple to understand for beginners. So how it's played is just very common stuff like e4, e5, very common opening at beginner levels. White plays this, attacking the pawn. White defends the pawn, and unlike the Rye Lopez going to b5, they go to c4. Another just move developing the bishop, like pressuring the f7 pawn with maybe after d3, knight g5 is just a nice thing. And it's a really just safe opening. Like, there's a lot of stuff to fall for, but it's really easy to notice for the most part. And because, I mean, the knight, like, the only tricky stuff at a beginner level is kind of covered here. Like, the knight covers these squares, bishop kind of covers everything, and eventually these two boys will cover stuff too. And just so you get an idea of the actual setup that you would usually get in the Italian, is usually they'd play something like this. You'd defend the pawn, they develop bishop. Let's say there are two options, or three options here, actually. Or there are a ton, but a lot, like, the three options that you would usually play just because it's really simple for beginners. There's bishop e3, knight c3, and bishop d2. And bishop d2, it's kind of sad move. It's at beginner level, it wouldn't even matter, honestly. Still develop the bishop. But if you're looking for a more complicated move, because with bishop d6 or d2, you're just really safe. But you know, it's not an amazing move. You're just safe for most attacks. The more possibly dangerous move for beginners is bishop e3. Because, I mean, if takes, then your king has, like, when it castles, and even before it castles, it just has a lot of open squares around it, so it's kind of vulnerable to attacks, but those attacks are easily defendable, so if you just know how to defend it, then you're just fine. And, like, let's say they castle, you castle. The point is, like, a small, like, an attack, and this is really obvious as an intermediate or higher player, but as a beginner, this is really easy to miss. Let's say you watched a video that says, like, oh, you should always develop your pieces, so in this position you develop your knight. This is only one of the attacks. They just take the pawn they just attacked, forking the queen and rook, which is just really nice for them, winning an exchange. Again, it's just really nice for them. That's only one of the, like, billions of attacks there are, but they're really easy to defend for the most part. And the last thing that you have in that position that's pretty simple for you is just developing your piece. Yeah. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of comments saying, oh, another move is bishop g5, you dumbo. Like, that's a move too. Yeah, I know that, you haters, but we're talking this video is about openings for beginners, and that yeah, you don't like this is the move that you could play, but the thing is, after here, the bishop is just kind of stuck, which you might not want as a beginner. And you always have to look after that bishop, which might be kind of challenging for you as a beginner. So that's why bishop g5 is not an amazing move for beginners, but if you know how to deal with the attack against the bishop, then you're fine with that too. I'm just sharing moves that like are good for beginners. Um, and I mean, yeah, that's the Rye Lopez. Like your opponent, it's just a really common game. Everybody just develops their pieces, and you'll get a lot of the same positions. But I mean, hey, dude, that's kind of what you signed up for. The second I said defensive opening this clip, so I mean, you can't really complain, okay? Yeah, so that's the Italian, just yeah, Italian for beginners. Bye.